Hey guys, Steven here, Fanatic Perspective. We got a head coach. How about them Cowboys? We officially hire Mike McCarthy, formerly of the Green Bay Packers, formerly Super Bowl winning head coach. Mike McCarthy. Apparently it's a 5-year deal, according to Ian Rappaport. And later today we also found out that Mike Nolan of linebackers coach of the New Orleans Saints is expected to be hired as the defensive coordinator. So we're going to break down all this, the beginning of the Mike and Mike era, 2020. How do they work with Jerry? How do we feel about the hire as fans? And what are some things that we can do to educate ourselves on these guys, and just some notes and tidbits. I got a ton of notes here that I want to get through, guys. But first, I want to give a shout out to our wonderful sponsors here, Boss's Ranch. Those of you in Central Texas, we appreciate everybody going out, purchasing the product, supporting the movement. Two awesome flavors here. We have a spicy flavor and a regular flavor. Both of them are superb. You can check them out at your local HEB, Cold Produce, Best Darn Ranch in Texas. So guys, what did Jerry want? I think it was pretty well defined based upon how everything played out from the end of the Jason Garrett, whether he was going to stay, what capacity if he stays, and how his exit was handled, and then how quickly we've moved to Mike McCarthy. Now, I do believe that Jerry Jones and the family and the organization probably had been in contact with Mike McCarthy before, based upon the limited interviews that were conducted. But going back to what did Jerry want and how does he feel about this team? I think how Jerry feels about this team is how many people feel about the team, whether you're a Cowboy hater or a Cowboy fan. You feel like the team is close. You feel like there's talent there that's not being capitalized on to where they should be able to make a legitimate run at the championship level, right? Whether it's the NFC Championship game and even progressing to the Super Bowl. And Jerry looking at that, I think that's where we eliminated the avenue of going down and looking at a college coach like a Lincoln Riley and even a Matt Rule. And I understand Matt Rule has limited previous NFL experience, but in the case of Lincoln Riley, no NFL experience. In the case of Urban Meyer, no NFL experience. So he wanted someone, because he feels like the team is close, with that level of experience based upon this particular job, the job that needs to be done of getting this team from good to great. Let's get some folks in here who have won, who have a ton of experience, starting with Mike McCarthy, right? So as we all know, Mike McCarthy was fired last season from the Packers after, 12, 13 seasons with the team, where he coached Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers. And I'm going to actually go down some of his history. But before I even do that, I like the hire. I do like the hire. It's not a splashy hire. It's not a risky hire. I saw Colin Cowherd today mention that, and was a bit critical of our organization, saying that he felt like this was a safe move and he would have gone after one of those people, one of the previous names I mentioned, to try to maximize and elevate. Like, that's the direction he would have gone. But I will say this. I like this hire, and I've liked it more after viewing the McCarthy project. And for those of you who don't know what the McCarthy project was, after he was fired, he assembled a group of other fired coaches and basically assembled a staff and was breaking down the entire league. And when I say breaking down, I'm not saying like, you and your boys on the couch sitting there watching Sunday Ticket, like actually whiteboarding concepts, drawing out game plans, schematically figuring out how they would attack different opponents, figuring out their own weaknesses. Everyone in the room, everyone a part of the McCarthy project, doing a full-blown self-audit. Also, one of the things that was a part of the project was taking a historical look at just the game of football. Mike McCarthy having a tremendous background developing quarterbacks, and that's something I'll get into here right now. You look at, he started out I actually started on college and then went over to the Steelers in the early 90s. But I wanted to kind of start his journey in 93 with the Kansas City Chiefs as a quality control assistant, but he spent a lot of time around elder Joe Montana when he was in the last few years of his run with the Kansas City Chiefs. And he actually talked about some of the things he learned from a footwork perspective and actually catching and throwing balls with him. So just being around one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. He ultimately, transitions into becoming a quarterbacks coach with Kansas City at the time under, I believe it was Marty Schottenheimer. But he coached guys like Elvis Grbac, a Rich Gannon, who ended up, obviously later in his career taking the Oakland Raiders to a Super Bowl, was an MVP candidate and a phenomenal quarterback at an advanced age. That was somebody else who he got time around and actually coached. He actually took over as quarterback coach for the Green Bay Packers, and that was his first stint with the Green Bay Packers, 1999. This is what's really interesting. He coached Brett Favre, and, how much coaching did Brett Favre need at that point? That's definitely debatable, considering he had won 3 straight MVPs. He had already won a Super Bowl. He had gone to back-to-back Super Bowls. Brett Favre was one of the best players in the league at that point in time. They did, though, the Green Bay Packers did draft a young guy out of Virginia that year, Aaron Brooks, and Mike McCarthy ends up going to the Saints the following year and gets the promotion to become an offensive coordinator under then head coach Jim Haslett. Mike McCarthy takes over. The Saints trade for Aaron Brooks, who the Packers had drafted in '99. Like I said, and he was in the quarterback room out of Virginia, who was a 4th-round pick. They bring him in to back up Jeff Blake. Jeff Blake was another older quarterback who was previously the Cincinnati Bengals, and they ended up, I think it was injury. I'm not quite sure how Aaron Brooks got in there. I believe Jeff Blake got injured midway through that season. Aaron Brooks takes over, and the next 4 years, they're a pretty solid team. They won the division, I believe, in 01. And then the next couple of years, they were like 8-8, 9-7. But Aaron Brooks was a very, very productive quarterback under Mike McCarthy. And I bring all that up because he spent all these time around all these veteran guys that I mentioned earlier. And then he got a really, really young guy that he had to mold and develop. And he did a really, really good job maximizing the talent of a 4th-round pick in Aaron Brooks. And when Mike McCarthy departed in 2005 to go to the San Francisco 49ers to coach the number 1 pick, Alex Smith, and take over as offensive coordinator under then head coach Mike Nolan, Aaron Brooks was out of the league 2 years later, and really didn't, he hit a ceiling and then went off, cliff following working with Mike McCarthy. So there's some encouraging things there in terms of what the player was like underneath Mike McCarthy and how he was utilized from a skill set perspective, because Aaron Brooks had a very different skill set from the other elder quarterbacks that we mentioned earlier. He only had 1 year with Alex Smith, but then he takes over as head coach of the Green Bay Packers in 2006. What's interesting about that? Brett Favre is still there, now older, advanced age Brett Favre, and you also have a second-year Aaron Rodgers, who really, really needed to be developed. And one of the things they touched on the McCarthy project as well was watching him day one when they got him, when they got their hands on him, his footwork, his drop. We always talk about how they broke down Aaron Rodgers' throwing motion and helping him develop that quick release and the way he whips the ball now, which is so beautiful. And this is where Mike McCarthy does deserve a lot of credit, and where we as Cowboys fans can be excited. He deserves a lot of credit for the development of Aaron Rodgers. Now, before that, they went 2007. Green Bay goes 13-3. They lose in the NFC Championship game to the Giants, who end up winning the Super Bowl, beating the Patriots that year. But Brett Favre retired and then tried to come back and then went to the Jets and that whole thing. Aaron Rodgers took over, and in that very short period of time, Mike McCarthy got him up and ready to play. And from then on became, as one of the greatest quarterback talents we've ever seen, right? So this is all really, really good stuff, good positive stuff for what we're inheriting, what Mike McCarthy will be inheriting in now a fifth year Dak Prescott, a Dak Prescott who is coming off of a year where he made a lot of he made a lot of progress, right? Anytime you see, and this has also to do with the offensive line and the weapons around him, and we have to give the whole team credit, as well as this change from Scott Linehan to Kellen Moore and John Kitna coaching him. When you see somebody's sacks go from 58 one year to 23, there's a lot of improvement with the footwork. We didn't see all the wild spin moves. We saw better accuracy, just better fundamentals all the way around. Now, as Dak got banged up towards the end of the year and as we started to lose and press a little bit, he did revert to some bad habits. But one of the things that excites me is that I was listening to Tom Pelissero today when they were talking about the coverage, and he's saying that Mike McCarthy, one of the quarterbacks he paid the most attention to, was a Dak Prescott. And one of the key things I took away from that is he said he was intrigued by how Dak was utilized. He was intrigued by what the Cowboys were doing with him. And very rarely do you ever hear a coach talk glowingly about how the previous staff was coaching the quarterback, considering the staff is there's going to be turnover. So what does that tell us? We can expect the possibility of maybe John Kitna returning, maybe even Kellen Moore returning, which seems more likely. And we've even heard reports that Mike McCarthy likes Kellen Moore and would be open to working with him. Because say what you want about Kellen, and I've even had to come around on this. In his first year as offensive coordinator, 30 years old, we went up statistically in every single category. And, granted, yes, I don't want to hear it either. We were the number one offense in the league yardage wise. And I get, some of those numbers are skewed. But what you can't skew are third down percentage and better red zone numbers and yards per attempt passing and the aggressiveness that we allowed our quarterback to operate. And that was still while we were running the Jason Garrett, Scott Linehan version of this offense. That wasn't even really Kellen Moore's own offense that he went in and installed himself. So those are some things that we should take account of. And I think Mike McCarthy, having stepped away from the game, because I want to get into some more positives here, having taken a step back from the game and studying the entire league, for him to say that about some guys, and we don't know if they were already talking or if they weren't or whatever. I know some people that are more skeptical of this and critical of the hire may say, well, he's just going to say that to do, to get the job, and he may not really feel that way, or that may not be fully genuine. I don't know. But what I do know is this. I know Jason Garrett wasn't into analytics, and I know that Mike McCarthy, prior to losing his job in Green Bay, wasn't a big analytics-driven guy either. But one of the things that's encouraging to hear, and just from what we're watching, is the change in his stance on that after educating himself, after taking his time to go and find the people with the data. They talked about him visiting the Pro Football Focus headquarters, how they're using the data, where they're generating those numbers, and how they can be incorporated into weekly prep, into what you're doing real time during the games. We see teams like Seattle and Baltimore using analytics real time during the game, whether it's probability to make decisions, what have you. Those are some things I'm excited to see as a Cowboys fan being implemented into, on top of our talent being coached up and maximized, because this league is so freaking competitive. And when you have a coach like a Jason Garrett, one of the reasons why you're not here, that's not willing to take advantage of certain things that other teams are taking advantage of, now you're at a disadvantage. It's very, very simple. It's not that deep. So hearing about the analytics stuff is super, super, super encouraging for me as a Dallas Cowboys fan when I'm hearing about this Mike McCarthy hire. What are some more positives here? I think he's going to bring healthy conflict to the room. And what do I mean by that? And this is, I'll take this another place later, but he's going to shoot the Jones family and people in the room straight, whether it's his staff. And I love the fact, I love how family oriented he is when it comes to his staff. Anytime you see a coach or a person in general assemble a staff when they're fired of other fired people, and we're talking and you're like, hey, how do we grow and develop as coaches? How do we get better? That's brilliant, brilliant stuff. And I don't care if you're on board with the hire or not. You have to acknowledge those are some encouraging things to see, and it's quite unique. Now, when I talk about the conflict, Mike McCarthy was a guy who did rub some people the wrong way in the Green Bay organization, including Aaron Rodgers, and they would get into it over whether it was philosophical things or how certain people were being coached. I think that's something we need some conflict in the room. Not every meeting we always talk about as fans, especially the Cowboys, having yes men in the room and whatnot. And Jerry, that's something for Jerry too. Maybe that's a negative as well, whether the Joneses can handle that or not. Because I think this is great for Mike McCarthy, and I think him, again, stepping away from the game, auditing himself, being a better version of the coach that went to 4 NFC title games, won 62% of his games, won a Super Bowl. If we're getting a better version of that person, because one of the knocks on Mike McCarthy, hey, we feel like he relied a little too much on Aaron Rodgers. He relied too much on Brett Favre. When you look at their offenses, their route combinations, lack of innovation, things seem to be very redundant. Defenses seem to be all over it. Unless Aaron Rodgers did something special or moved the offense around, we couldn't create. Those things are kind of worrying to hear, because we went through that with Tony Romo, right? Where it was like, well, unless Romo does something, and that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for somebody to get Dak to the point where, yeah, he can be at that level, but also to help him so he can win and beat people, truly beat people schematically. So, and I know those are some negative things. The other negative things with Mike, because I have concerns. I'm not saying this is a home run, my first choice type of hire. I'm just saying the more I dive into this, now that this is official, I'm excited about it. And I'm excited with the energy he's going to bring. I think some of the reasons why you saw lack of innovation with the Packers, where things got kind of stale in that relationship, is, you kind of gas out. And that happens sometimes whether it's career-wise, relationships, what have you. The guy I saw in those interviews, though, seems to have a refreshed energy. His batteries look recharged. I think that's big time for a head coach, especially coming into the situation he's coming into, where he won't have to rebuild much. And I don't think he was looking to be a builder per se. Like, there's some head coaching jobs like Miami last year when they hired a Brian Flores. And then they trade the entire team, right? Brian Flores was brought there to build. I got to create a culture. I don't think Dallas has a bad culture, but they don't have that championship push juice. What's going to take us to the next tier? Because Jason Garrett did do a good job of establishing. I mean, we've won the division, 3 out of the last 6 years. I mean, every other year, kind of. We've gone the divisional round twice, actually 3 times as well. So it hasn't been all doom and gloom around here where we're a bunch of losers. That's not the case. So I think Mike McCarthy's coming in saying, hey, guys, this is what I saw last year. This is the audit I've taken on myself and on your football team. And I see all this potential. And here's how we can mold it, put it together, and get us to that championship level. I've talked so much on this channel about championship level coaches. And guys, I can't stress enough how excited I am for a new voice, new energy across the whole organization. Not just for Dak and his development, not just for the offense, but for this entire franchise and this organization. Because Mike McCarthy did have a lot of power working alongside Ted Thompson in Green Bay. So some of the things, and they always beat us. So I think he was 7-3 as a head coach against us, including some playoff victories, right? So what are some things that he can open us up to that they exposed? Blind spots. I think those are all things that intrigue the Jones family in making this hire. And look, people are going to be critical of Steve. They interviewed 2 people. They interviewed Marvin Lewis and they interviewed Mike McCarthy. And I started this video by saying, what did Jerry want? He wanted that proven experience. And both Marvin Lewis, by the way, Marvin Lewis is a champion. People forget that as a defensive coordinator on the Ravens, when Brian Billick was pretty much nothing more than a figurehead head coach. And Marvin Lewis led one of the greatest, if not the greatest, defense in NFL history. Okay. And then also coach, because I'm hearing a lot of Marvin Lewis slander as if he wasn't 9 games over 500 in over 10 years in Cincinnati. One of the shittiest organizations on the face of the earth in professional sports. Who else is doing that in Cincinnati? You notice they fire Marvin Lewis. They go 2-14, and people over here are like, he was only going 9-7 in Cincinnati. He was only going 10-6. Mind you, he was in a division with the Steelers and the Ravens every year, who both won Super Bowls, and his quarterback's Andy Dalton. And yeah, he went 0-7 in the playoffs, but like this whole and in the 0-7 in the playoffs, he's saying Cincinnati. Just them getting to the playoffs is a miracle in itself, considering how horrendous. Like, you want to talk about bad organizations, like you think about the Browns. The Bengals are below that. Okay? So the whole like Marvin Lewis shouldn't have been a candidate thing, I don't put him in that Jack Del Rio, Jeff Fisher box. I mean, you got to be objective here. When bad organizations can ruin good coaches, look nothing further than Bill Belichick and the Cleveland Browns, staff featuring Nick Saban as well, right? So, yeah, and you guys haven't seen that 95 Browns doc, I highly recommend it because that tells you everything you need to know. Anyway, going back to Mike McCarthy and the 2-interview deal. Look, they knew who their guy was in terms of Jerry and Steven, and they wanted to make a move and do it in the manner that they did it. Now, do I think they prolonged some things last week to soak up some media attention? Absolutely. Jerry's a showman. He runs the greatest show on earth, that is the Dallas Cowboys. Best soap opera running, right? So, yeah, there's some, and of course, we announced today, on the eve of one of the best wild card weekends we've ever seen in NFL history in terms of the competitiveness of all 4 of the playoff games and the drama that came out of those games. And then the Cowboys head coach news comes out, trumps all that, right? So, guys, but again, going back to Mike McCarthy, even before we get into him stalling in Green Bay, him maybe not winning when they did, because Green Bay is a very good organization. They did draft well. And it's like, hey, he still had a 10-8 postseason record, which is not bad. And then all the guys he's coached at the quarterback position and how this can aid a Dak Prescott. I'm pretty sure when he interviewed, the 2 things that he probably hit on the most was, A, you guys are getting ready to pay Dak Prescott. How do you maximize that investment? I'm your guy. I'm your guy that can get you the most out of your investment and help bring this team to where it needs to be and make you feel better about paying the quarterback whatever you're going to pay him. And then the second thing is I'm willing to work with Kellen Moore. I'm willing to work with some of the guys that y'all had that you want to hold over, maybe like a Mark Colombo, maybe a Gary Brown. We've heard conflicting reports about some of the previous holdovers from the staff that may stay. Now, these are only the offensive guys because all the defensive guys are going to kick rocks, right? So, the Gary Browns, the Mark Colombos, I don't know about a Doug Nussmeier or Sanjay Lal, but these are all conversations that Mike McCarthy at least is willing to adhere to and work with regarding the Jones family. Now, we also got news that Mike Nolan's probably going to be the guy. Mike Nolan's been a head coach in this league. He's been a defensive coordinator. I think 20 plus years of experience overall between the two. And I'm really excited about this defensive coordinator hire because they're actually going to get a nose tackle. Look, Mike McCarthy and Mike Nolan, they don't do business without nose tackle, okay? And that's something we've just completely devalued in our organization, that and the safety position. We just punted those every single year. And I feel like with McCarthy being in this organization and Mike Nolan being in this organization and their track record at those positions and how they've been featured, whether it was, now granted, Mike McCarthy deserves some heat and there's a concern about him keeping Dom Capers in Green Bay so long. That was inexcusable. However, Mike Nolan, how these guys operate, they always got some big guys, some beef in the middle, and good tackle play. Now, Mike Nolan recently just, got eliminated from the playoffs yesterday with the New Orleans Saints, linebacker coach. But you look at a Demario Davis, screams what could be for Jalen Smith and how he's utilized. For those that don't know, Demario Davis was all pro this year, okay, at the inside linebacker position. So these are the way he will be utilized in an attacking manner, letting him play downhill with big people to keep the other team's big people off of him so he can see and fly. That's how we need to play defense. I'm also excited for the fact that we're probably going to go to more of a hybrid look, right? I think that benefits guys even like a DeMarcus Lawrence, who, yeah, he's a 4-3 defensive end, and you know, we obviously he didn't have the year that he wanted to have. I know he was more effective than his sack numbers may indicate, but we didn't get the level of production for the most expensive player in Cowboys history. I think going to a hybrid look, and you look at some of the ways that a Davenport or a Cameron Jordan is utilized in the Saints defensive scheme, they're lining up all over the place. So many amoeba looks. Sometimes they're in 3-down linemen. Next series, they're in 4-down linemen. They're really adjusting their defense to their opponent, but they're on at all times. They're very, very aggressive. What happens with the defensive backs? Chris Richard, goodbye. Rod Marinelli, goodbye. One thing that Chris Richard did do was Byron Jones, moving him from safety to corner. What will Mike Nolan do with a guy like a Chidobe Awuzie? I could see him potentially moving to safety. That's just my own opinion and what I'm seeing, but I could see a transition like that just based upon the player's skill set. I think these guys are going to come in, take a fresh look at everything, knowing the manner in which they want to play defense, and that it does fit a lot of the personnel that we have. I felt like we were actually doing the opposite when you're asking our linebackers, whether it was Jalen, Sean Lee, Joe Thomas, Leighton Vander Esch, to play from the depth that they were consistently being asked to play from. I feel like those days are going to be gone. And I feel like the secondary is going to be benefiting from that. You look at the history of Mike Nolan defenses, one of the common themes, turnovers. They generate turnovers. I'm excited to see that. Now, I've been going through a lot of good. Let me take a sip of water. I've been going through a lot of good. There are some legitimate concerns. The breakup with Aaron Rodgers, and I talked about healthy conflict, but anytime somebody does have a history of conflict and does have a history of, some of the things that went down, area of concern. Probably the biggest concern for me, because I think the lack of innovation thing will be solved if Kellen Moore stays. I'm not really worried about that. And with McCarthy's time away and what he was able to curate with the McCarthy project, as well as his insight now into analytics, I'm not as worried about that. What I am worried about, though, is the run game. Kellen Moore showed a propensity to go away from the run game too early with Ezekiel Elliott. We also did not see Tony Pollard maximized or utilized as much as he should have been in this offense throughout the season. And there were times where they flat out did not trust the player without reason, right? So Mike McCarthy has a history of being very pass happy. Now, some have argued, well, he had Aaron Jones that last year, but he was still finding his way between him and like Jamal Williams and those guys. And they were using people like Ty Montgomery. The only real back they had that they drafted was Eddie Lacy, and he developed obviously a severe weight issue, which led him out of the league. So outside, and when he did have Eddie Lacy, he did run. One would argue he did run him. But I am concerned about that because I don't think I want the best Dak Prescott, but I also don't think Dak Prescott. I know Dak Prescott's not on that level where he's going to be able to do the things that they were asking Aaron Rodgers to do and just figure everything out with no help, in the sense of not allowing the run game and really how we're built with our offensive line and the mentality that we've had. So I'm curious to see his approach, and that is a legitimate concern for me. Another concern I have is special teams. I almost threw my phone when I heard that Keith O'Quinn, they were trying to move him over to the scouting department. And that's another thing, and this is on the Joneses, and it's not even Jason Garrett. And I've said it so many times, you got to stop being loyal to bums. Keith O'Quinn, no, get rid of him. Get him out of here. Sometimes you got to turn the page, and sometimes it's better for the people that get fired so they can go and do stuff like McCarthy Project and get better as coaches and individuals. Stop leaving these dudes around or trying to reassign somebody. He's been here for over 10 years. Good day, sir. Good day. Okay, so the special teams thing, though, the reason why that's a concern for me is Mike McCarthy struggled with special teams in Green Bay. That was a concern. One of my Green Bay fans hit me up about that. I've actually heard that from several fans. So knowing how much we struggle with it this year, flat out lost us football games. That's something where I'm like, all right, if it's not my head coach paying attention to that, is my GM going to hold him accountable to that? And I feel like they didn't do a good job holding Jason Garrett accountable to that. So those are definite concerns. And then the ultimate concern, and the way we'll finish this video, and I know he signed a 5-year contract. How's he ultimately going to vibe with Jerry Jones? Because and what type of leeway will Jerry give Mike McCarthy? Are you just making him a supervisor and you're still really the guy in charge? Or are you really going to allow Mike McCarthy to run this organization, this culture? Because we don't have any proof of that, Jerry. We don't. And so if you're just bringing him in to add some more wrinkles to the offense and work better with Kellen and maximize Dak in your investment, and then you got the defensive guy to make us more aggressive and give us some more looks, we're still not going to win. We're not going to win until everything is aligned through appropriate leadership. Now, I am glad that they finally went outside the family with these hires, at least these first two, even though they may be keeping. I'm not saying everybody needs to be out of the family overall, but I am glad that they're finally got to the point where they're getting outside voices. So I'm not going to beat them up too much for that. But what I will say is they've got to let this man work, especially when you're giving somebody a 5-year contract, right? They're in win now mode, but we also have faith in you long term. And I think that was, they talk about him spending the night there, and I've seen all the memes of Jason Garrett coming home and and Mike McCarthy in the kitchen whipping up breakfast. You guys are very, very clever out there on social media. But overall, I'm cautiously optimistic about all of this, about the Mike and Mike situation. And we'll see how the rest of the staff hires go. I'm curious to see what they decide to do with the wide receiver coach position. I'm curious what they decide to do with their defensive front, if they will truly go to a hybrid look similar to what the New Orleans Saints and Baltimore Ravens run. I'm curious about all these things. So, guys, I can't wait to hear what you have to say in the comments. I appreciate everybody I know it's a lengthier video, but really wanted to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of our new head coach, Mike McCarthy, our new defensive coordinator, Mike Nolan, and like I said, cautiously optimistic. All right, guys. Peace.